All right, folks, let's talk about PlayStation 4 again, but this time trying to answer the question of when will PS4 die? When will it go away? Why has it not died just yet? Which, some might be able to easily answer that as, oh, there's still a pretty large PS4 community out there. But here's the thing, right? With how much frustration there is going on relating to PS4 and any PS4 related announcements, pretty much anywhere you go online, any sort of comment thread, there's usually some top comments in there wondering, when will PS4 go away? And you can easily see that and go, okay, well, there is still a pretty big PS4 audience, but there's nothing really unusual going on. And it seems like another case of just short-term memory as far as like what might be seen as unusual, but not necessarily based on the timeline we have right now. Because that's the thing, right? It's easy to look at, Gamescom opening night live, for example. And there was not a small amount of games announced there that do indeed have PS4 games coming. There are still PS4 games coming out, which seems insane, but sure enough, that's still happening. Marvel Rivals, for example, actually showed up on the PSN backend for a PS4 version, which is slightly old news, but that does indeed appear to be a real thing that's coming out fairly soon, I would think. But you have those things alongside what we also expect this long into the life cycle of what is really, a console in its legacy years, and that is things winding down. So a lot of these live service games like PUBG and Genshin Impact have now confirmed shutting down their PlayStation 4 versions, which I actually feel is maybe a little bit too soon because that's the thing. It might be more semantic, but you can look at the timeline and see that we're about where this stuff usually happens anyway, and it's really a toss-up as far as like what individual studios choose to do. There's nothing unusual really going on right now. Something else we can also mention is PS Plus Essential games, which are not going to prioritize PS4 versions anymore. Sony has already confirmed this. They gave a pretty decent timeline for when that is expected, and we're coming up on that month, which is January 2026, where they will not be prioritizing PS4 games. And that's also very particular language because it implies we're still going to get PS4 games on PS Plus, if only because there's so many cross-gen games that have a PS4 version. But that's the thing, right, is that the cutoff has been announced. It is January 2026, and that is actually about the same time frame as what we saw with PlayStation 3 and Vita getting their games cut off for PS Plus. That was March 2018 for those that remember. And to sort of align that here, that would be representing 5 years into the PlayStation 4's launch, and so with PS4, same thing, about 5 years into PlayStation 5. You see what I mean? We're already like in that landscape of PS4 winding down, but you've got these circumstances where it's still going a little bit further depending on the studio, the publisher, or the service in this case, right? But looking at sales, right? We had a recent financial report come out. PlayStation 5 worldwide sales have hit 80.3 million, which is about 2 million behind PS4. And that's fairly negligible, especially considering the current global economy we're in, where this entire time throughout 2020 to now, consoles have stayed the same price and now have gone up in price. The average selling price for PlayStation 5 has been much higher than PlayStation 4. And now we're in kind of a weird spot where, the console has gone up in all big key markets. Here in the US, for example, it recently went up as well, a very important market. So we'll see, exactly how that's going to affect PS5's sales going into a very important holiday quarter. But then we have Q1, Q2 coming up in 2026, which will have if we assume it comes out on time, a very important key release, which will likely move over some remaining PS4 users. And that game, in theory, could buck the trend of the console decay curve, and we might see PlayStation 5 make up that 2 million something ground behind PS4 on a launch line basis. Again, it's a very negligible number when you consider the higher average selling price and a big title like Grand Theft Auto 6 still not launching just yet. But looking at the install base, again, there's nothing really unusual going on here. Looking at SIE's business segment briefings, where they've outlined monthly active users, we saw last year, which would have been, May 2024, their MAUs were actually 50-50, like right down the middle, and that was 4 years into the console lifecycle, where 49 million were on PS4, 49 million on PlayStation 5. Now that story, I remember, came out and everyone thought that was kind of insane that there were that many people still on PlayStation 4, but that's the thing. PlayStation consoles historically, over every single generation, And that also includes all this leadership changeover. We can't even necessarily chalk this up to, how the company might be led in a different way. No, over multiple generations, multiple leadership changeovers, we've seen that Sony will support their systems for about 10-something years. That includes manufacturing consoles and game submissions, which is also the very important thing we're trying to consider and look at here, because Sony doesn't even manufacture PlayStation 4 anymore. I'm fairly certain. They made a formal announcement for Japan, never for the West, which I'm not sure why, because unless they're only doing a few thousand-something consoles every quarter, I'm not sure if that's even a thing or if it's worth it to them. But I'm fairly certain they're completely done manufacturing PlayStation 4, because I tried to secure what I thought was the final batch, and while I put up the video January 2023, I was able to buy it new on PS Direct, and the console at that time had a manufacturing date of September 2022. If anybody has a date that is later than that, then by all means chime in. But otherwise, that was an MW2 bundle, new from PS Direct, and as of right now, you just cannot find a new PlayStation 4 unless it is sitting in stock at a GameStop in a Rust Belt town or something like that. But that's the thing. They're not even making PS4s anymore, and that was, again, the sort of timeline of what we typically expect for how late into the next cycle they do support and manufacture the next console. So the more recent SIE business segment briefing that we did have, we didn't get an actual breakdown for the MAU number, but total monthly active users was 124 million, and you can see that PS5 is now the majority. There's nothing really unusual about that, as we are now in the 5th year of PlayStation 5, and that just is going to obviously grow more and more in favor of PlayStation 5, despite everyone's frustrations. But now let's get into actual game releases, and when will that finally be over for PlayStation 4? And you might be surprised to learn that we're still not quite there just yet if we consider historical data, because it's so easy to look at what is going on right now with the global economy, cross-gen games, diminishing returns, the very similar dev environment from PS4 to PS5, and you would think, oh, that's why PS4 is still going on as long as it is. And that actually might only be the answer to why it would go past what we've seen in prior cycles, but we actually are not there just yet. Now, granted, I think PS4 is in a much healthier spot versus prior generations, but if you do consider game submissions, that's when Sony will straight up say no to a developer. You cannot release a game on PlayStation 4. If we look at that, PS4 is probably a little bit healthier, but that's the thing, is that Sony right now, and I think this is the right play, they should not be rejecting a developer that has a PS4 dev kit and wants to ship a PS4 game on PlayStation Network. I think that's good. They should be supporting their legacy machines as long as they reasonably can, and that's great. We've already seen a lot of big AAA studios put behind PS4, so this sort of argument that PS4 is holding games behind, I'm not sure really holds up that much nowadays, when a vast majority of the bigger AAA studios have indeed put behind the Jaguar CPU, those archaic spinning HDDs, and we are getting some very nice-looking current generation games in the here and now. But broadly speaking, for games that are a little bit more modest in scope, or if they can reasonably still ship on PS4, I think Sony should still be allowing game submissions. So looking at PlayStation 2 as an example, that console launched in 2000. The last game for PS2 is well known as Pro Evolution Soccer 2014, which came out in November of 2013, over 13 years later, and PS2 has always been well known for being the most successful console ever, selling hundreds of millions of units, and having games released well into the PlayStation 3 lifecycle, and so having PES 2014 come out in November of 2013, that represents over 13 years later, and that's always been like a cool factoid about the video game industry. But, you might be surprised to learn that from PlayStation 3, which came out in 2006, that final game for that console was Hawaii Shakedown, which came out August 20th, 2020, nearly 14 years later. Now, that's not really all that unusual, is it? So with PlayStation 4, which came out in 2013, we are currently 12 years this November. 12 years, and we're still getting PS4 games. I mean, I don't know about you, but the launch alignment there is still par for the course as far as why we're still getting PS4 games. So I know it's easy to chalk it up to, again, the very similar dev environment, cross-gen period, the current global economy, how many people are still enjoying PS4 and PlayStation Network on that console. But the thing is, there's really nothing all that unusual right now. We're 5 years into PlayStation 5. It is the primary console for most people that play on PlayStation. The monthly active users have eclipsed PS4 at this point. Games are shutting down, studios are moving over, but there's still a handful of stragglers, and that's really no different than what we've seen previously. Now, I would make the argument I think Sony probably will allow game submissions even past PlayStation 4, so don't get me wrong, I think once we're into 2027 and possibly still seeing PS4 games, then this would be a different story. But in the here and now, complaining about when will PS4 die, well, I think we've got short-term memory because it should still be getting game releases for the handful of studios that are willing to do it, and I actually think that is a good decision. PS4, in many ways, too, is analogous to the Wii and PlayStation 2, where a lot of late lifecycle games for PS2 were actually also Wii games. They were very similar in performance, they spoke to a wider gaming audience, and that was just something that for publishers and certain studios, it just made sense. That's why you saw a lot of PS2 and Wii games at the time. And so PS4 might very well be in that same position, as we see a lot of studios try to focus on Switch 2 development now, and also Steam Deck verification. And again, these are not like one-to-one comparisons, but they are within a similar performance threshold to where it really wouldn't be all that surprising to see a PS4 game come out when studios are aiming for Steam Deck verification, Switch 2 support, and things like that. But it all ends with Sony. When will Sony stop game submissions on PlayStation 4? I would think it actually will go a little bit longer than PS2 and PS3, so don't get me wrong, it probably will go a bit longer, but I think we are right where we need to be as far as legacy support, and I still really enjoy the fact that PS4 can remain this relevant for as long as it has been, which in my view is the PlayStation way. If you're on PS4, enjoy PS4 for as long as you can, if that is what you choose to do so, because you have plenty of options. And if you remember, too, we had a report from Matt Piscatella where he was actually surprised some studios are still shipping PS4 games, if only because, game sales aren't even good over there. You know what I mean? We are seeing that transition happen. It's happening at a pretty reasonable pace, and I don't think there's really anything unusual going on, so why won't PS4 die? Well, it's actually not time just yet. But it's very close, and we've got all the regular key indicators. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation, and I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.